coach Bronco Mendenhall leading Virginia onto the field in 2016. The ESPN announcer Robert Lee had been scheduled to call the Virginia William and Mary game in Charlottesville on Saturday. Steve Helber, Associated Press. The latest episode of the Culture Wars to Washington Sports, and the news media that cover it, was prompted unintentionally by a broadcaster named Robert Lee. His employer, ESPN, announced Tuesday night that the name he shares with the Confederate general made him a poor choice for calling a University of Virginia football game in Charlottesville, where a recent protest over the removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee left a woman dead and became part of the national dialogue. It was a story tailor-made for America's present hyper-polarized, kinetic and more than slightly absurd moment, and it has left one inescapable conclusion. However, many times sports media outlets, and chiefly the biggest of them all, ESPN, are implored to stick to sports. The centripetal force of politics is bound to make a battlefield of almost anything. ESPN made the decision with Lee, the company said in a statement Tuesday night, as the tragic events in Charlottesville were unfolding, simply because of the coincidence of his name. In that moment it felt right to all parties, the statement said. It's a shame that this is even a topic of conversation, and we regret that who calls play-by-play for a football game has become such an issue. The news was first reported Tuesday by Clay Travis, a Fox Sports contributor and editor of the website Outkick the Coverage, who has led a robust chorus of criticism of ESPN for what some perceive as liberal bias. Numerous conservative outlets, including Fox News, have covered the Lee story extensively. Specifically, Travis reported that ESPN wished to avoid offending some viewers. In its statement, as well as in background discussions with reporters, ESPN denied that avoiding offense was a motivation. ESPN's president, John Skipper, reiterated that point on Wednesday in a statement posted on the company's internal website and provided to the New York Times. There was never any concern, by anyone, at any level, that Robert Lee's name would offend anyone watching the Charlottesville game, Skipper said in the statement. Among our Charlotte production staff there was a question as to whether, in these divisive times, Robert's assignment might create a distraction, or even worse, expose him to social hectoring and trolling. He added that Lee was offered the chance to broadcast a different game on the same day and opted for that. I'm disappointed that the good intentions of our Charlotte colleagues have been intentionally hijacked by someone with a personal agenda, Skipper wrote, apparently referring to Travis, and sincerely appreciate Robert's personal input and professionalism throughout this episode. ESPN did not make Lee available for comment. Travis' reports seemed to provide new fodder for those who accuse ESPN of liberal bias, a charge leveled this year after the network laid off dozens of employees. While that move was made for business considerations, it nonetheless provided a forum for long-standing complaints over ESPN's perceived slant. It seemed unlikely that Lee's broadcasting of the Cavaliers' season opener on September 2 against Lower-tier William and Mary, to be streamed over the internet via the Espn ACC network, would have resulted in much more than a few mischievous internet memes and Twitter jokes. I know I'm not the only hoping there was a Confederate general named Joe Buck. Sean Davis at Shamda of August 23, 2017. James Andrew Miller, who co-wrote a history of ESPN and has contributed to the New York Times, said the lead decision ESPN indicated that ESPN wants to be as far away from geopolitical and cultural issues as they can be. The network said that for safety reasons, Lee, right, would not be in the broadcast booth as planned for the University of Virginia's September 2 game at Charlottesville. ESPN, via YouTube. If they could build a biosphere where all that stuff is out of the equation, they would, Miller said. Instead, conservatives found new ballast while liberals bemoaned what they characterized as a silly preemptive capitulation to unlikely or marginal offense. You guys know there's no coming back from this ESPN thing, right? When the people who control media and culture are this far gone, it's over. Omri Karen at Omris Aaron, August 23, 2017. Don't blame liberal conspiracy for this ESPN stupidity. I was at the last meeting, and nothing like this came up. https://t.cotworsknip, Harold Pollack at Harold Pollack, August 23, 2017. Compounding matters, Lee is Asian American. The Asian American Journalists Association said in a statement that it is unfortunate that someone's name, particularly a last name that is common among Asian Americans, can be a potential liability. Patrick Miller, a political scientist at the University of Kansas, said the episode arguably provided more proof that the United States' present political climate is unusually tribal, with two opposing sides in greater and more extravagant disagreement than is historically typical. There's a big divide on the parties when it comes to regions and racial attitudes, which taps into the debate around Confederate symbols, Miller said. Republicans today believe whites and Christians are far more discriminated against than other groups, whereas Democrats think the opposite, and the same goes for conservatives and liberals. While Miller said his research concerned political elections rather than debates over sports culture, he saw how it could apply to the ESPN situation. He also disclosed that he is a Virginia native who graduated from William and Mary. "I can understand what ESPN is thinking, given the context. Two Virginia schools, one of them UVA, where Confederate symbolism was at the core of what happened there," he said. Maybe just to avoid the headline and touching on people's feelings, but a day later it seemed clear that ESPN had blundered by overestimating its ability to keep its and Lee's decision quiet and underestimating the reaction once it became public. Notably, Travis said in a blog post that the news has been leaked to him by multiple Outkick fans inside ESPN. "Turns out people in Bristol are not all children of Bernie Sanders," James Andrew Miller said, referring to ESPN's Connecticut headquarters. "There's actually some conservative voices there, and they are starting to push back more and more, because they don't like their company being associated with the liberal agenda." Now, Miller added, ESPN must decide whose opinion they care about. A version of this article appears in print on August 24, 2017, on page B11 of the New York edition with the headline "ESPN pulls announcer and starts a storm."